Lieutenant Lancaster confronted Mr. McAbee at the medical cart for not wearing his face mask.
How many of them are illegal aliens?
We do not track our detainees by that status, by immigration status.
What do they do all day then?
It may be a little bit hard to answer that.
Senator Romney said that he spends personally $5,000, I forget whether he said a day or a week, for his personal protection.
Any idea who leaked the Dobbs decision? So that's really not responsive to my question. Are you going to provide the documents or not, I guess is the question.
Is every one of these courthouses using magnetometers? Do you do assessments as to non-detectable firearms getting into court?
About some slides that were created.
We embrace greatly the idea that the very loud announcement.
How many inmates have been registered to vote under this executive order?
We will not track how many inmates, how many detainees actually register.
That leaves me baffled, actually, a little bit.
I couldn't answer that, not with any certainty.
Interesting.
We will now introduce today's witness. The Honorable Ronald L. Davis is the Director of the United States Marshals Service. He was sworn in on September 27th of 2021. Director Davis leads an agency with more than 10,000 employees and more than 500 domestic offices and 4 foreign field offices. He has served more than 28 years in law enforcement, thank you for that, starting with 1985 with the Oakland, California Police Department. Director Davis, is it true that the U.S. Marshals Service is responsible for the care, control, and custody of the January 6 detainees?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. It would be for those that are still pending trial, yes.
Very good. Okay. Are you aware of a Lieutenant Crystal Lancaster?
Offhand, no, I'm not.
Okay, fair enough. What about a Mr. Ronald Colton McAbee, this former deputy behind me, who is a January 6 inmate at the D.C. Department of Corrections?
Mr. Chairman, I am not. I'll just remind you that we do have over 59,000 people in our custody.
Fair enough. That's just asking a question. You're aware, you're not. Director Davis, on September 5th, 2022, at around 11:45 a.m., in the D.C. Department of Corrections, Lieutenant Lancaster confronted Mr. McAbee at the medical cart for not wearing his face mask. So we were in the height of COVID, I got it, not having his face mask. It's my understanding that Lieutenant Lancaster then deployed her handheld OC spray, sprayed it all into his face at close range. It's been reported Lieutenant Lancaster intentionally used these chemical agents several times against Mr. McAbee without any provocation. As a former sheriff, did it for a long, long time, 30 years. So I want to talk a little bit about the use of this chemical agent, these OC sprays. In the use of force model, the use of force continuum, it would require that even if an inmate is passivity, the restraint, he's not being physically assaultive, an officer would not be authorized to use these chemical munitions unless the inmate was assaultive. If video footage were to show that Mr. McAbee was not assaultive, would Lieutenant Lancaster have violated Colton's civil rights under the color of law?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Mr. Chairman?
Would Lieutenant Lancaster have violated Mr. Colton's civil rights under the color of law if he was not showing any type of assaultive behavior?
Thank you for the question. I'm not in a position to respond to or talk about any specific investigation.
Okay, all right. Do you know if, so you don't know this Lieutenant Lancaster, placed on administrative leave, like right away, placed on administrative leave. I placed deputies on, I had 600 or so. Placed them on administrative leave when there was some type of an investigation. Lieutenant Lancaster is on administrative leave, which I learned she was placed on it immediately after this incident, but I don't know where she is now, and apparently you wouldn't know either, where this individual would be today that's been placed on administrative leave after the incident.
Thank you again. I just reminded that the custodial facilities are run by, not run by the Marshals Service.
January 2023, I had an opportunity to visit the D.C. jail. Spent about an hour there, spoke with the director, Thomas Faust. Are you familiar with Thomas Faust?
Yes, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
he's the director. He and I got along. He's a former sheriff, I'm a former sheriff. We just connected right away. Great, great individual. The guys in the jail seem to be pretty concerned. I went into the pod where these J6 detainees, we learned that the officers all wear body cameras, so everybody has a body camera on in the D.C. jail. And Director Faust said the footage between Mr. McAbee and Lieutenant Lancaster existed, because I was concerned about this incident. People complained about it. The wife reached out to me and said, hey, my husband was sprayed with foam. He's a former lawman. He served 7 years. In fact, he later told me that I could come down and view the footage. I said, I got some complaints here. Let me come down and view the footage of this Lancaster spraying this, see if we have any issues. Later was retracted. You haven't seen the footage then, I'm assuming?
No, I have not.
Okay. In January, my staff FOIA'd this camera footage from both the U.S. Marshals and the Department of Corrections. The U.S. Marshals, who you oversee, chased 6 detainees, denied our request and stated that it fell within the D.C. DOC. We accepted it, thought it was okay. However, the DOC later denied our request and appeal because, quote, a release of such footage would constitute as a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy and is exempt from disclosure. I've got a release here from the wife. It's all here. He signed it. Said, I'd like to see the video footage, right? He signed this congressional privacy disclosure to release the footage. I have it here. Lieutenant Lancaster is a public employee. The D.C. Mayor's office determined Mr. McAbee's privacy disclosure form was ambiguous since the D.C. DOC is not a federal agency. Mr. McAbee's detainee of the U.S. Marshal, up underneath you. And I find this to be a severe departure from the truth and a blatant excuse not to release the footage. My point is this, is that we have a problem here. I got complaints from the wife, got complaints from the inmate under your custody inside the D.C. jail, right? And now we can't get this footage. It stinks. It seems like she's on administrative leave. We got a problem. We have a severe problem. And my point is this. I'm not really even asking you. I'm demanding that you call the D.C. DOC to release the footage on one of your detainees. We should have a right to see this. If it's bad news and you don't like what it shows, we got to confess up to it. We got a problem here. In fact, I'm going to make it my personal mission to use every subpoena power that I can get from this committee to get this footage. I apologize to this gentleman. I apologize to his wife, Sarah, for having to go through this with no answers or help. So can I get a commitment from you that we're going to look into this? I have your assurance that we're going to look into this and get this video footage, because if not, I've got to go to DOJ. I don't care. I have to go to whoever, because I think we have a problem here, and it seems like it's being covered up.
If I just may start by saying that I share your priority to make sure that those that are in our custody are treated humanely and within federal standards, and if there is misconduct, we are committed to investigating all allegations of misconduct. I will commit my team to work with yours to see how we can be responsive to your request.
So my friend from Texas indicated incident that it is not your facility, obviously, and you have inmates in other facilities. How do you manage that when there are potential complaints against inmates in other detainees in facilities? You have jurisdiction over the detainees, that the facility is not yours. How do you respond to safety and security and constitutional protection?
Thank you for the question. We have a couple of things. One, each district, as mentioned, we have 94 U.S. Marshals, one for each judicial district that are presidentially appointed. They are responsible for the facilities, oversight the facilities in their district. We also have thousands of career professionals who do a tremendous job in holding these facilities accountable. We have some over 1,800 facilities that we use. So we have processes in our agreement with them that they're to meet federal detention standards. We have processes in which we will conduct inspections, some announced, some unannounced, to make sure they live up to these standards. But we also work very closely with the people that run our facilities. And a large percent of them, about 50%, are run by our sheriffs around the country, who we work very closely with to make sure that we're always living up to the conditions of confinement.
Is it correct that you folks received guidance to avoid arresting protesters unless absolutely necessary from the Attorney General?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. No, it is not.
So you were not told, the U.S. Marshals Service was not given guidance to avoid arresting protesters unless absolutely necessary?
The guidance from the Attorney General of the United States was to protect the Supreme Court justices' lives and that of their family and while at their residence, that we retained full authority to enforce the law, but also to make sure that we did not do anything that would place the Supreme Court justices' lives at risk. Lives at risk, excuse me.
Thank you, Director. We'll be following up on that. In regards to transporting prisoners that are in federal custody, how many of them are illegal aliens? On your watch?
Thank you for the question. We do not track our detainees by that status, by immigration status.
Where can I find that information? And actually, Director, wouldn't that be germane Wouldn't it be important to know that for the U.S. Marshals Service if someone is in the country illegally and you're having to transport them?
Thank you for the question. Again, we don't track by immigration status, and what we do factor in for transportation would be the offense itself.
So the people that are on your security detail when you're at the office, because your office in Crystal City is a secure facility, is that correct?
Correct.
What do they do all day then when if they've come in, escorted you in, will take you, escort you home? What do they do then all day?
No, I appreciate the question, but again, I won't get into what my detail does or any detail. There's a lot of work that goes into protecting more than just what people may see. And once again, I don't want to expose our methods or talk about to what extent or the size of any protective detail, let alone mine.
Have you and your office explored dedicating an aircraft for your domestic travel? So in other words, having an aircraft dedicated to the U.S. Marshals Service and specifically you as the director?
No, we have not.
You have not explored that?
We've explored, no, not for my personal travel. We are exploring aircraft for extraditions, for the transportation of our special operations group, for those operational missions in which commercial flight may not be prudent, but definitely not for my travel.
The order to phase out private prisons was issued in January of 2021, so it's 3 years ago. In 3 years, you phased out 7 prisons. You've got 5 left. How long do you think it'll take to phase out the remaining 5?
Thank you for that question. As I started, we are definitely committed to full compliance with the order. It may be a little bit hard to answer that. We know at least one, the contract will end very soon, I would say within the next year. But for others, there are still the issues of logistics.
Senator Romney said that he spends personally $5,000, I forget whether you said a day or a week, for his personal protections. Do you think it in order for the Marshal Service to think about protecting threatened members of Congress?
I'm sorry, the last part of the question I didn't get.
Do you think it in order for your office to think about protecting threatened members of Congress?
I thank you for that question. The challenge with that would be our statute right now authorizes us to protect specific members as far as the judicial process, so we would not have the authority to do so.
Statutory change.
Statutory, yes.
Just recently, in December, a man was arrested for leaving a voicemail threatening to kill Chief Justice Roberts. Considering all of the threats, the Attorney General Garland directed the United States Marshals Service to avoid arresting pro-choice protesters unless absolutely necessary. Director Davis, thank you for your leadership in protecting our federal judges. What was your response to Attorney General Garland when he directed you to limit arrest of protesters?
Thank you for your question. The Attorney General's order was very clear, it was actually crystal clear. Protect the lives of the justices. He made sure that we still had full authority to make arrests, but not to engage in any activity that would compromise their safety. I did not receive any orders from the Attorney General to avoid any specific arrest.
So would you have agreed with that directive if he gave it?
I'm sorry?
Would you have agreed with the directive?
I'm not going to respond to a hypothetical.
Let me ask you this. Any idea who leaked the Dobbs decision? I mean, we've got all these great arrests going around the country right now for certain activists, but any idea who leaked the Dobbs decision? Do we have any record of that?
Once again, thank you for your question. I think probably as the congressman know that would be, I would refer you to the Supreme Court Marshal, which is actually not part of the Marshal Service as they were doing that investigation.
What he did ask specifically was for the production of documents, and he gave 4 categories of documents. And I'll read to you what those are. All documents and communications between the Marshal Service and the Department of Justice referring or relating to enforcement of 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 for the period of May 2nd, 2022 to the present. All documents and communications between the U.S. Marshal Service and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland referring or relating to the enforcement of 18 U.S.C. 1507 for the same period. All documents, again, same time period for the Eastern District of Virginia, and then all documents and communications between the U.S. Marshal Service and the Executive Office of the President referring or relating to the enforcement of 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 for the same period. The reason I raise that is because in your response, there were no documents included or produced or any communications, and I'm wondering if you can explain what your thought was in not including any of those documents or communications.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am aware of the response that we sent to the chairman, and I look forward to working with the committee if there's additional information that you requested, but we provided a response to the chairman.
But you didn't provide the documents, and that's what he specifically asked, Mr. Director. He asked for the documents and communications. And the reason that those are important is because it'll either corroborate, it's going to corroborate somebody, somebody's allegations or the position of the U.S. Marshals Service. Somebody's going to be corroborated, but we're going to get to the truth. And as part of our oversight function, we're entitled to those documents and communications, and that's why I'm wondering when you might provide those to us, or are you telling me categorically that you're not going to provide those to us?
Once again, thank you. I would continue to work with my Office of Congressional Affairs as well as the Department's Office of Legislative Affairs that I know has been in contact with the chairman's team to try to be responsive. We did send a response, as you mentioned, that the chairman should have received it yesterday, but we will continue to work to see how we can be responsive.
So that's really not responsive to my question. Are you going to provide the documents or not, I guess is the question.
I would work with the team to see how we can process the request.
All right.
Is every one of these courthouses using magnetometers, and have you had any leakage of weapons in courtrooms?
Thank you for the question. Every courthouse does have that. I cannot think of any, but I can double check and make sure that we've had any leakage or as far as people actually being able to breach that location with a firearm, but I can definitely double check.
Okay. Or other weapons?
Or other weapons, yes.
Yeah, if you would get back to us on that, that'd be terrific. Do you do assessments as to non-detectable firearms getting into court?
My understanding, no, we do not.
Maybe you should. I think it's time to be thinking about that because we know the technology is ever-changing.
Senator Katie Britt, back in March of last year, had a conversation with the Attorney General about some slides that were created for the marshals in the training up to the protection of these justices. Are you aware of that? Are you aware of the slides, first of all?
I'm aware of the slides that the senator brought forward, yes.
Okay. Did the Department of Justice create those slides, or was it the U.S. Marshals that created those slides?
The training provided to the deputies on that assignment was provided by the Marshals Service at my direction and with my career professionals who, by the way, I think did a tremendous job as that mission has been met every day for about 400 days, and they've been very successful.
So were there instructions not to arrest protesters given by you or someone else with the marshals?
The direction provided to the deputies, and if I can say, it's been over 1,700 deputies have rotated through this assignment. And the message to them was very clear. It's the same as the Attorney General gave me. Protect the lives of the justices and their families. Deputies always retain full authority to enforce the law, but take no action that will compromise their safety. That was the heart and soul of the training.
Right, so here's the rub that I have and the problem that I have, Director, is that for a month, protests are happening outside of justices' homes in a leak of a Dobbs decision that was not yet decided, presumably, right? And so are you aware of 18 U.S. Code 1507?
Yes, I am.
What does that say?
I'm going to paraphrase, allow me
That's
to do
fine.
that.
Yeah.
And basically, anyone that pickets or parades with the intent to interfere, obstruct, it doesn't say just Supreme Court, any court official.
Correct.
Right, at their place where they're presiding or where they're residing or may be at.
Right, and so they could be arrested, presumably, under that code section, correct?
Yes, they could.
They could be fined according to that code section, right?
Yes.
So why was that not done here?
If I may go again, once again, the primary mission for the Marshals Service given by the Attorney General was the protection of the Supreme Court justices' lives and that of their family.
Look, I don't dispute the mission, and thank you for what you've done to protect their lives. But they have received death threats, have they not?
I can't speak to the rest of the Supreme
That's in the
Court's-
media. So they have received death threats. There have been arrests. But the whole point is the code section is pretty cut and dry to me. There's no ambiguity within the code section. It says that if you protest or picket outside of a judge's or justice's homes, that they can be arrested. And so these justices, in fear for their lives, are like confined to their homes with these people outside that are threatening their lives, picketing outside. Y'all protected them, but I think the question is, why would we even issue guidance from the U.S. Marshals that is contrary to code that was passed by Congress in, I think, 1994.
Thank you again. The guidance given to the deputies would be to protect the lives of the justices. It was a protective mission to protect the lives of the justices, as the Attorney General has said repeatedly, and I will say again, retaining full authority to enforce the law as long as any action they take did not compromise the safety of the justices. And as the Attorney General also mentioned, I will say again, is the decision on whether to take action and whether that action compromises the safety has to be made by the deputy in the field at the time.
Director, this is where I have a little bit of an issue, because the law is pretty clear. The law says that you will arrest people for picketing outside of a judge's or justice's home with the intent of influencing their decision. This was a leak of a decision that had not yet been decided.
We actually needed more money,
Yes, we did.
not
That was
less.
a request.
But House MAGA Republicans are proposing to give you less money. How would that be devastating on your ability to carry out the responsibilities that you're charged with?
Congressman, what I was saying is if we ask for additional protective operations to address the threats, if we were not to get additional resources or the budget or cuts in that, then we would have to make the decision that that judicial security is still the #1 priority, which means this would have an impact on the other critical missions, as you alluded to, like fugitive apprehensions, recovery of missing and endangered children, because our primary mission is the protection of the judiciary.
Has that new policy resulted in a decrease in search warrant applications for no-knock warrants, no-knock search warrants?
Thank you, Congressman. I would say for the Marshals Service, based on our primary mission for fugitives, that we embrace greatly the idea that the very loud announcement, we make it very clear why we're there and who we're after. So I can't think of a time, and my staff can't think of the last few years in which we've ever used no knock. And so this has not had the policy, which we comply with, does not have any negative impact on our ability to operate.
My questions now are going to go to Executive Order 14019, which is from March of 2021. I'm wondering how many inmates have been registered to vote under this executive order?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think we'd have that number. We would not track how many inmates, or how many detainees actually register.
And so if you're not tracking, how are you facilitating registration to vote and their ability to vote?
Let me just clarify a question, if I may, sir. You're referring to the executive order on voting access, 14019,
That's correct.
So that the executive order requires that we provide our detainees, and as I mentioned earlier, just as a reminder, nearly all of them being pretrial, so not yet convicted, presumed innocent, education materials at their facilities about their right to vote if appropriate. It is nothing, the Marshals Service does not register voters or track who does register.
So, that leaves me baffled actually a little bit. So you don't know how many inmates are actually voting then, or actually requesting ballots or registering to vote. You don't know that.
We don't track that. That's correct.
So you got a number of Secretary of States have a problem with that. With that executive order. So I'm interested in the compliance. Then, do you feel like you're otherwise in compliance with that executive order?
I do.
Okay. Inmates are allowed to register in states that typically require a specific amount of time to pass before an individual's voting rights are restored. So even though they're presumed, many inmates are recidivists. Is that not true?
I couldn't answer that, not with any certainty.
Interesting. So you don't get any criminal history on any of these inmates as you're just temporarily housing them, so you're saying we don't need to know about their propensity to violence or anything else?
Now, I understand the question, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm trying to provide accurate responses. I don't know the numbers or percentage of those that are in our custody or the 80,000 or 100,000 we will process, how many have criminal histories. I'm not suggesting that none of them do. I can't answer the question.
Okay, so I really I'm trying to get to the bottom of this, make sure I understand this. So in Arizona, for instance, any term of supervised release has to be completed before voting rights of an inmate are restored, for instance, right? So the language in the executive order I read is fairly broad, you know, to encourage and facilitate that type of thing, registration and voting. I guess my question at this point becomes, are you ensuring that the executive order is not contradictory to, like, state law? And how are you doing that?
Thank you for that question. The implementation of the executive order for the United States Marshals Service is working with our facilities, and I think you identified their facilities all over the entire country, is to provide them the educational materials about their access and right. We do not register them. We do not basically provide election guidance. It is about providing materials about their right to vote. And I think the executive order goes further to say as applicable or as eligible. So it's not it is for our executive order, for our part of the executive order.
Right, that I get. So when you said earlier that you didn't keep track, for instance, of somebody was illegally in the country or not, which would have influence on their ability to, and eligibility to vote, how do you determine then who you're going to facilitate and provide this? You just provide a blanket to it and say, hey, you got a right to vote, but you guys don't step in and say, but not you, you're illegally in the country?
Right, I'm not going to, the implementation requires the facilities to provide educational material. Then it's up to the facilities how they do that. But once, I would just clarify that we do not process, we do not facilitate, we provide them the materials.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for being here today. And with that, we're adjourned. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I will note that you had submissions for the record, and we'll admit those.